Hello, people, and here we are again. This is the third person that I'll be interviewing on the topic of men's rights and men's human rights and everything. And this is Alison Tieman. For those who don't know, she's.
Mm,
Uh, I have prepared a beginning note for you. If you please allow me to read it for you, you can correct me if I get
sure,
anything wrong.
sure.
So, so Alison Tieman of Saskatoon, also known as Typhon Blue of the blog space genderratic.com, is a well-known men's rights activist. She is the
Mm,
founder of Honey Badger Radio, the longest running and most popular podcast on men's issues in Canada. She is also the president of Honey Badger Brigade Incorporated. Did I get it right
hmm.
so
Yeah,
far?
that's right.
Um, Her works have been published at A Voice for Men and the Good Men Project. Paul Eel,
Hmm.
whom I previously interviewed, is also an ardent supporter of Alison's works and her contributions to men's human rights movement. She has a master's in environmental design from the University of Calgary
Hmm.
and has a focus on the effect of toxic environments on men's mental health.
Mm.
She is also a comics creator of the sci-fi comic Xenospora, starting from the War Crimes issue 00, followed by Physical Contact.
Hmm.
Also, the main part in 2015,
Oh,
ringing.
you. Okay. All right. The whole thing, the whole shebang. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
She was forcefully evicted from the Calgary Comics Expo and got banned from all the conventions for a period of about 10 years because
Hmm.
feminists didn't like Allison questioning feminism or advocating for men's rights.
Hmm. Yeah, specifically, I said that I didn't like feminism because it excluded the men's vulnerabilities and it framed women as victims.
Mm.
And it that I mean it removes a lot from the conversation of gender. And then for that, I was summarily kicked out. But I later learned that it was a little bit of a conspiracy by Mean Girls, shall we say?
Yep.
This is something out of a Lifetime movie,
Mm.
like the Mean Girls film.
Right.
I just wasn't liked, and what I said was actually pretty innocent. But yeah, and a part of it was because I was thanking Gamergate for having helped me get to the convention by putting the logo on a banner that we had at the booth, at least for the first day. And yeah, that got me in the crosshairs. Plus, a few of the Mean Girls knew me from previous work that I had done with men's issues, so apparently there was some kind of conspiracy in the back rooms to get rid of me because we can't care about men. God forbid the world will implode. All right. Well, thanks. That's to I guess I could add my current projects. We're still working on Honey Badger Radio, of course. It's now gone from once a week to 4 or 5 times a week. And my producer, Brian Martinez, helps us do that. And he would be a great guest as well to interview because he's got
Wow.
an interesting perspective
I,
on men's issues.
I would love to have all of you people as men's human rights roundtable conference. That was what I was planning for actually, but I'm not sure when I'll be able to do it. But I hope to one day I'll have
Mm.
almost as many people as possible on this.
Yeah, well, that certainly I could get you hooked up with Brian because he comes from a perspective like he grew up in the a ghetto sort of area, like a lower working class area in Chicago. So he's seen a lot of the issues related to welfare and the loss of fathers firsthand. So he's got a very interesting perspective. I highly recommend talking to him. Have you spoken to Karen Straughan yet, or?
I did write her a mail and she hasn't responded.
Oh
Please,
yeah, she's famously like
I
she's,
know.
but maybe I could see if she'd be interested as well. And Hannah, of course, Hannah
Yes.
Wallen. Yeah,
Yep.
she definitely. But just to get up to date, Xenospora as a project is, well, we'll see what happens. I think I need to find an actual artist to help me out to finish that. So I put that on hiatus, and I'm now working on a book called The Captive Eye, which tagline a zealot assassin infiltrates Ragnarok or infiltrates Norse mythology to end Ragnarok. That is a zealot assassin infiltrates Norse mythology to end Ragnarok or to prevent Ragnarok.
So
And yeah. So the preliminary readers have said it sort of resembles Alice in Wonderland crossed with Game of Thrones. So there you go, to get it sort of situated in the conceptual space. But that's what I'm working on right now. I did do a fundraiser to get editing, and I'm currently working with a developmental editor, which has meant significant revisions on the plotting, but hopefully it'll be out by not September, summer of 2025. So there you go. Look forward to that. That's my new fiction project. And yeah, and if you want to see Honey Badger Radio, it's at we do streaming at Badger Live Streams
yes,
on
yes,
YouTube. Yeah.
of course, yeah.
Okay. All right. So I guess the intros are done.
Yeah,
Situated.
yeah.
Well, actually, I'm curious, how did you get into this kind of a thing? Or is it just
This is a long story, but I, put it short. It was I would say that I've always been interested in being pro men right from my childhood. I didn't realize that I've been
mm-hmm,
that, but then it just stayed with me all the time. And then whenever I get
mm,
to hear any news item saying that a man is the villain and or a woman is always the victim of it, it didn't quite sit
mm-hmm,
with me well all throughout my childhood. And then suddenly, probably around, it was 2012, there was a movie called The Hunt. Okay,
mm-hmm,
it starred Mads Mikkelsen in the main role. The story is about a school teacher who is really fond of kids. He gets accused of pedophilia.
mm,
So the entire plot is about how he tries to convince his community and the people around him, his wife and his family and everyone, trying to tell them, no, I did not do anything. So the accusation goes this way. A kid uh, somehow ends up watching porn on the tablet or some sort of digital device. She's
mm-hmm,
a small kid. And then when parents catch her doing what she was doing, she puts the blame on the teacher,
mm,
which is Mads Mikkelsen. So that is when people start to witch hunt. They'll probably bring him down whenever he tries to go to church or something like that. He can feel the weight of the community's eyes on his back every second.
mm,
So the entire film is about whether or not he'll be able to prove that he isn't the one who had shown who had shown porn material to the kid. So that
mm-hmm,
is one. And then right after, I think I started to see the patterns one after the other. And then I got busy with my education. And then again, 2018, Me Too happened. And then
mm,
Johnny Depp got accused. All
mm-hmm,
And then I started to see this. It's not sitting right with me. I wasn't completely or actively involved in this. But then when Johnny Depp's case started to pop up and it has become, very popular,
mm-hmm.
followed by the downfall of Marvel Phase 4. So that was one thing. And we had Kathleen
All
Kennedy.
the insanity with Marvel, yeah.
Yeah. So one after the other, I started to see all these things, and it just made me so angry from inside.
Mm,
So this how are these people getting away? They've butchered Star Wars right from the
mm-hmm,
Awakens, and I was like, okay, the Meru Seuss in a in new shoes. That's all. That's what I saw.
mm-hmm,
Like, okay, so this is not something we have to sit back and watch it let fold in real time. Who is actually insulting the audience for not liking their content.
mm.
So that was like trigger moment for me. And then She-Hulk dropped. I snapped completely, I would say. So
Yeah. Yeah, people we get accused of radicalizing people. No, it's not us. It's
yeah,
it's you guys and the crap that you put out.
yeah,
People just get tired of it. Yeah, Mary Sue was actually really a big part of the conspiracy of Mean Girls that got me kicked
yep.
out of
Sam Meggs wasn't
Calgary Expo.
Sam Meggs, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, she's long gone. I don't know what she's doing now, but yeah, she was part of it. And interestingly, the Mary Sue was left dealing with the fallout of all of that, but not too much because they're still in operation. Although I think they have changed hands. They're owned by a new group. I mean, it was basically a for-profit project by a man who was a millionaire, and he wanted to use feminism to make money, and he did. So good on him. He exploited that whole narrative, Taught
Yeah.
a lot of women to treat themselves as victims. Yay, empowerment. But yeah, so they definitely push this whole, they're not very honest when it comes to all of the stories, the television, the films that are now pushing the narrative. I recently started looking at Game of Thrones and then House of Dragons.
Yes.
Have you watched any of those properties?
Nope. I'm aware of the
No.
content and stuff. I know, how the eighth season got failed and it had massive backlash from the fans and all that.
I,
Uh,
you know,
yeah. So apart from that,
I'm going to go I'm going to go and say that the eighth season had, at least it had the balls to make the woman the villain. Like, and not just any woman, a woman who was wanting to bring about an
okay,
effective social justice utopia,
okay,
and they made her the villain. So you got to give them props for that. That's pretty ballsy.
okay,
But I've been watching House of Dragon, and even other people outside of the community have started to pick up on this kind of the way that they approach gender, in which men are always bad and women are always good. They're always the voice of reason. And they're getting tired of it. Like, just even I would call normies, not dismissively, but people who are not cued into this space and don't spend a lot of time thinking about these issues. And they're starting to realize this. And how can they not? I mean, it's so pervasive and so repetitive. And because of that, it's getting so boring to them, because there's nothing new. They're not saying anything new. You know exactly what's going to happen. The woman will be the voice of reason. The man will say, I want to kill. And then she will be proven right. And so there's the whole plot. There's the whole plot, everybody. That's what you're going to be watching from now in perpetuity, because of ideological outlets like the Mary Sue caping for writers who have no new ideas.
right.
That's going to be the plot for the rest of eternity. It's going to be a woman. She's going to be like, I want to bring peace and love to the world because I am a woman and women are all angelic. And then there'll be a man and be like, no, I want to step on you and call you a cunt. And then I don't think that you should do this thing. And then we'll be like, oh, but you've said, and then the thing will happen, and she will be proven right and he will be proven wrong. And she will discover that all along what she needed to do was believe in herself and not be restricted by patriarchy. And that will be her great discovery. And this will be the story from now until eternity.
Right, right.
Yeah, sorry, I got a little bit swept away.
This is one of the fantastic pieces. I mean, this is going to be the fantastic section of the interview. I promise. This is going to be that. If whoever is following this, they'll have a blast. Trust me. So, before we get into a deeper conversation and stuff, I just wanted to ask you something. In your interview with Sean T. Smith, you mentioned a particular point. Okay, saying, are there any positive traits that men and masculine individuals have that women and feminine individuals don't have, in the same way that you say that men and masculinity have toxic traits? Have you received any answer for that so far?
All right. So what I have found is that everybody I pose this question to, everybody who uses the term toxic masculinity so far, cannot answer the question of what are the positive traits you associate with masculinity in the same way that you associate these toxic traits. And in fact, they can't even really give the positives of the toxic traits, which is really, really ridiculous. So for example, if they say that men are callous and they are, they want people to earn what they get, right? They're all about the meritocracy, the capitalism. They don't want to give people anything. Everybody needs to be able to, but you can't recognize that emphasis on meritocracy also creates excellence. It means that if you have to earn what you get and you have to become good, then that creates achievement and it develops things, and it develops things worth having, and it's an incentive for productivity. So they will say that men are callous and want everybody to earn everything, but they won't acknowledge that the positive of that is that men are meritocratic and encourage achievement. So even if they recognize a toxic thing, they won't look at that toxic thing and say, well, but in this circumstance, it's positive. No, women are equally meritocratic as men, at the same time as they don't expect anybody to earn things in the same way. Like
Right.
they're not as callous about, oh, you have to earn it. You can't just receive it because of your needs. You got to earn it because of your merits. So women are equally meritocratic as men, but not as callous, not as focused on forcing everybody to earn things by merit. How is that possible?
Yes.
The only way it's possible is because you 100% associate everything positive with women and everything negative with men, even in the case where negatives have a positive. So if something is good, it has to be associated with women, even if it's the inverse of something negative that you associate with men. And
Right.
it is so it is actually very bigoted and and illogical at the same time. You're actually twisting your head into a pretzel to try to say things like this. So when I challenge them on it, I either get, oh, these gender neutral things, like when you actually ask them, they'll list a bunch of positive traits and you'll say, well, do you associate these things with men and masculinity in the same way that you associate toxic traits? Like, are men more likely to show these positive traits than women? They immediately back down on that, and they basically say, no, no, that's not true. And then you say, well, then that's a gender neutral trait. It's not a trait that you associate with men and masculinity in the same way as you're associating these negative traits. You can't say, well, men can overcome their negative masculinity to achieve a gender neutral betterment. That's not the answer. And then some of them respond and they say, well, there are these things that are associated with traditional masculinity, which is the thing that they're against. And I'm like, so you are going to appeal to the thing that you're trying to destroy to justify my criticism of you. Like you're trying to destroy this thing. You can't appeal to something that you don't consider legitimate to legitimize your point of view. And so much sophistry, so much weaseliness. And it all comes down to this one simple fact. They want to see men as toxic. They do not want to recognize even the logical inverse of certain toxic traits, which are positive in certain circumstances and in certain applications. They don't want to recognize anything positive about men and boys. They just don't.
Right.
Everything positive has to go to women and girls. Like if you say that men or even masculine individuals, like women who might be more on the male side, are more likely to have these kinds of traits, then you're excluding women from something. And that is against equality somehow. So if men have anything unique, women are excluded, and that's against equality. Therefore, it has to be denied.
Right.
And it's just it. And but yet again, they are perfectly fine with saying that men are worse than women, but not in any way will they say that men are better.
Right.
Even in the ways that are logically follow from how they're worse, like being more callous, being wanting people to earn what they get, right? Instead of just giving it to them based on their needs. That would mean that men are more meritocratic, which encourages achievement and productivity. They can't allow that. So men cannot even be the positive inverse of the negative things they say they are. And it is like, it's very contemptible and it's illogical and it's a lie, honestly. Like there's a reason why men do most of the work maintaining the utilities.
Right.
And it's a combination of a greater ability to tolerate discomfort,
Okay.
a greater incentive towards earning merit, even if the merit isn't necessarily socially, like it doesn't have a high social cachet, and a greater willingness to take risk. And all of these things are positive and very necessary for the functioning of society. And men have more of them, period. I mean, I could say it.
Right.
Men and masculine individuals have more of that. And we refuse to recognize it because, again, that means that there's something positive in the world that women don't have.
Right.
And yet we will 100% associate negative things with men, which we do not associate with women. So we could solve this one of two ways. We could recognize that men have unique strengths and unique approaches that are very beneficial to society and to women and everyone in it. Or we could recognize that women are equally capable of the kind of aggression and violence and destructive behavior that men are.
Right.
or some combination of the two.
Okay.
But right now, what we believe is in complete defiance of reality.
Right.
So what you might term a lie.
Yeah. So I want to dig slightly a little bit deeper into the comic that you have, created. So without giving
Interesting.
without giving much, plot details about it, can you tell me if the story has anything to do with, countering feminism or trying to address any men's issues in a metaphorical way or taking a dig at matriarchy? What was the intention behind, writing that story, and where did you inspire? Where did you get that inspired from?
Um, oh, I have to go way back to all of the Xenospora stuff. The idea was more to look at how whoever is in positions of overt power
Okay.
ultimately doesn't matter at the end of the day,
Okay.
because what defines people tends to be customs and habits around their behavior with each other.
Mhm.
And like honestly, people look in the past and they think that governments are as powerful, influential, and nosy as they are today, and they
Right.
weren't. Most people's lives were defined by the customs of their local communities. you know when they took the harvest off, who was expected to participate in the harvest, who got the benefit of it, who did you go to in order to get your infected toe healed, all that kind of stuff. Very local stuff, very much about the customs and habits. And who was teaching that?
Right.
The women.
Right.
So women provided the substrate of most people's reality throughout human history. And we completely deny that by focusing just on the governments, which often had far less influence than they do today.
Right.
Like, it's just, I mean, you might see a judge once every 3 years. I mean, even longer the further you go back. So how did the system of laws really have that much influence on your day to day? It didn't. Everything came down to customs and expectations, and specifically the expectations of men that were taught to them by the women of their community. So I'll use an example. In Medina, I think I believe it was a town in around Italy, like Malta. I think it was around Malta. And this is something that happened centuries ago. But there was a nobleman who
Okay.
ended up talking to a peasant's daughter,
Okay.
and without her father's permission. And when the women of the town found out about it, or they demanded that the father do something because their honor had been violated. So
Mhm.
he got the brothers and his sons together, and they went and they tracked the nobleman down and beat the ever living crap out of him.
Okay.
And then they returned thinking honor was done, and they met the women. Like, the women were at the gate, and they basically said, no, that is not sufficient. And this man went back with his little posse, and they killed the guy. They killed the nobleman for talking to his daughter. Who was the one who established that norm and that expectation that men kill and die for their honor? And that was women. And how did they do it? Through habits, through stories, through setting the local customs. And that defined people's interactions far more than government. Like, the noble would be at the time a representation of government. Be like if people, the taxman came into a compound in the States and they just killed him and that was it. It's like, nope, we're not giving you taxes. That's the end of it. And
Right.
and it's like that is the reality of history. And what I wanted to get at with my story is, it doesn't really matter as much who is in overt power. What really defines people is that local customs and habits and the culture, far more than which sex is in power. So it's
Right.
almost like a story of matriarchy versus patriarchy. Doesn't matter.
Right. Right.
It doesn't matter.
That's a very,
Yeah.
very good answer, I would say. Okay. And I'd like to touch upon this aspect that of your inspiration for comics in general, getting into the field of comics. I think if I picked it right,
Hmm.
you were inspired by ElfQuest and Dave Sims' Cerebus, the artwork, correct?
Wow. Yeah. Where did this come? Did I actually say this
I'm not
yeah,
right now. I'm not saying
I
I.
was I was a fan of Sim. I read almost all of his telephone books. And yeah, I did also really like ElfQuest. I think ElfQuest didn't get more into like the systems and the institutions the way Sims did,
Mhm.
but it was I like the interpersonal dynamics of ElfQuest. Not maybe not as much her later stuff, but the earlier stuff I really enjoyed.
Right.
That was one of my yeah, it's one of my earlier influences.
Nice, nice, nice.
Uh
The reason I brought that up, that's because Xenospora usually, I'm not sure, I could be wrong though, but the story felt somewhere similar to this French film called as Jackie and Women's Kingdom. Have you heard about it?
no, I actually haven't, really. Huh.
So I'll just give you the plot summary. It's just a single line. So in a country where women are in charge, a man goes to unusual lengths to make his dream of marrying the daughter of a military leader come true. So this is the plot line.
Mm,
Do you think
interesting.
that do you think that it has some similarity to the one that you have written? Probably.
Um, Let me think. Well, I think that the way that I approached it is the romance ended up being a lot more political and difficult. So
Yes.
the romance doesn't really it's part of the story, but it's sort of compounded by the politics and the violence that's happening. Sorry, it's conflicted. So
Right, right.
it would it's really it's I guess it would be really difficult to say. I would say that the romance is a part of it, but it's more like in a way of examining the political differences between the cultures
Right.
and the difficulty of proceeding with a kind of connection like that. I'm not sure if what you were describing is similar, and I have to read it. So I'd have to get back to you on whether or not there
Oh,
was a
it's fine. It's
there
fine.
was like a strong similarity. Plus, I'm also sort of out of the Xenospora mindset, and I'm doing a lot more work with the captive eyes. So I have to sort of get back into that mindset. So there,
I know.
a little bit of time has elapsed. So,
Got it. Got it. No issues. That's fine. I think you did really good so far. I was actually under the assumption that when you said that you're into comics and you're a comic creator, I was thinking more on the lines of, John Romita or Tim Lee, Alan Moore, and all the people. It's because I come from a background where I'm, very much inspired and entertained by the pop culture, especially Donnie Darko from the 2000s.
hmm.
A tattoo of the bunny on my um, the back of my neck. So I get it. When I saw your artwork, it really hit me like with the vibe of heavy metal from the 1980s. Ralph
Oh,
Bakshi's.
heavy metal, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I love heavy metal and Bakshi. Yeah, I've watched I
yes.
think pretty much all of his videos. Have you seen Rock and Roll? That's another.
No, I don't think so. I might know, but currently I'm not able to recall it right away. Yeah,
Yeah, no, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on in my mind. Honestly, the cartoon or the comic was originally based on a novel that I wrote.
okay,
So if I were to be completely honest, I'm sort of a novelist first.
right.
And getting back to that is like I would really like to finish Xenospora, but again, I don't know if I have the artistic chops, and I don't mean in terms of necessarily like talent, but just the ability to go fast. It's like it's a little challenging for me, but yeah, it originally was a novel that my husband actually said, "Well, I'd read it if it was a comic." So that's where that came from.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I do like a lot of that sort of counterculture
Yeah,
comics. I have a
yeah.
lot, but I'm not as much into like the superhero comics. Unfortunately, I know a lot of people are, but I've never really was.
No issues. All right. So I'm sure this must be a common question which you have come across a lot, but I'll try to sum it up in a neat way. So if I understand it correctly, what I've observed is that you've had multiple red pill moments in my observation, at least. So I think the first red pill moment for you was when your mother gave you the book, The Princess at the Window, if that's the
Yep.
timeline. And the next is, I think you also mentioned that you were influenced by the works of Lionel Tiger and Warren Farrell, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep. Yep. Well, I think you know more about me than I do.
so, and later on, you went into mid 90s, and then you came across the news groups on the internet spaces like Sock.man and No More Mr. Nice Guy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. And then again, it moved on to early 2000s when you mentioned that you came across a woman soldier who got pregnant to avoid going to the war.
Mm-hmm.
So it,
And instead of calling her out, the feminists responded by defending her, and I was actually really horrified by that. Um, and there is no defense. Like if a male soldier goes on leave and gets a really bad sunburn, he can get in trouble for damaging equipment, for not making himself not or damaging his ability to deploy, but a woman can do this just and just to get out of deployment. Like
right.
that's unconscionable, in my opinion. And it was one of the big moments where I realized that I don't think feminism will ever deal with women's responsibilities to society. So it will keep grabbing more power, more privilege, and it will construct a group of people that all they do is grab more power and more privilege, but have absolutely no responsibility to the effect of that power. I mean, look at the vote. Okay, women have the vote. Women are now the majority electorate. When this was all being discussed in like the early 1920s or prior to the 1920s, it was recognized that there was a problem with women becoming the majority electorate. And in fact, they set the age for women voting at 35, so they didn't immediately become the majority electorate as a result of all the death of young men in World War One. So they knew that this is something that was coming down the pike, that women would dominate voting. And they didn't want that to happen. And now we're in a situation where women dominate voting. And instead of taking responsibility for the consequences of that, that means that women are 100% responsible for our society as it is now.
Right.
That they are the ones voting for the politics. And they'll say things, well, vote doesn't matter. Well, then
Yeah.
why did you want it in the first place? Like, why do you say if the vote doesn't matter, then not having it wasn't oppression?
Yes.
Okay. Well, obviously you wanted this say, but you don't want to acknowledge now women are the ones who define politics. They are responsible for that. And we can't go around making excuses about it. We can't go around constantly blaming men because they're the ones who end up being the politicians. Well, why? Because politician is a risky job. It's socially risky, it's emotionally risky, and it's physically risky. I mean, look at what happened with Trump. So women don't want to do it because they have a higher risk intolerance. They have a higher sensitivity to risk than men. So it doesn't matter who is the politician. They're just doing a job. They're trying to appeal to the electorate. It's women who define the political landscape because they're the ones being appealed to. And all I ever hear is excuse making. Feminists never say yes. I mean, it feels like it's kryptonite. Women are responsible. They cannot say that. They every single time, and it's patently obvious, women are the majority electorate. That means they define the political landscape. Feminists cannot say women are responsible. These are the three words that cannot leave their mouths. And it is. And at that moment, when I heard that story about the female soldier who got pregnant in a circumstance where a male soldier, if he just had a sunburn, making it impeding his being ready to go be deployed, he would be that would be something he would be punished for.
Mhm.
And feminists made excuses instead of saying she failed her responsibilities. I realized there was nothing or everything started to click into place because there was a lot more behind that than just that. But there is nothing that feminists will say women are responsible for. There's no sense of responsibility at all. And yet they still grab for more power and privilege. So we're
Right.
creating a class of people that's responsible to no one, but has every time they don't have a particular power or privilege, the feminists come out and say that's unfair. That's what women deserve this. You're oppressing women. So they're going to end up, women are going to have everything and be responsible for nothing. How do you run a society like that? The answer is you don't. It fails.
Right. Right.
No stop, no pass go directly to jail. And like I said, feminists cannot say those three words. Women are responsible. And I mean, it's not just feminists. There's a lot of people who can't handle that. Like I've
Yes.
been in arguments with traditionalists, people who are more like Christian or more on the right, and I say, okay, we need to stop blaming men.
Right.
Women have responsibilities here, and they'll say, but blaming a gender that never gets us anywhere. I'm like, but you've been blaming men. So essentially, what they say is, you can't blame a gender. That's why we got to blame men.
Mm.
What? And it's funny because everybody has this problem. A lot of people that I read, I'm like, yeah, let's blame women. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's see where that gets us. Are we going to die? Are we going to implode? Are we going to go to hell? No, let's blame women. Let's do it. Let's do that thing that nobody can do. And let's see what happens. let's do true anarchism, right there. Let's do the thing that nobody can do. Let's see what happens. Let's get on our sled, go over the top of that freaking almost 90-degree cliff and see what happens. But let's do it. Let's get crazy. And everybody just freaks out. It's like, oh my God, you're blaming women. Oh, we're all going to melt. Oh, we're all going to implode into little green blobs. Something horrible is going to happen. Or maybe something great. Who knows?
True. True.
Maybe something holding women to some kind of merit will cause something great to happen because they'll now have to achieve something. Okay. Anyway, that's a
That's
crazy rant.
brilliant. That's brilliant. I'm having fun. Yes. So I actually wanted to bring up the topic of the voting a little bit later into the section, but since you already brought it up, I also want to mention to the audience, whoever might be watching this, that in 1895 Massachusetts, only 3% of women actually advocated for vote. Majority of 96% of women didn't even see a need to even have the right to vote. People don't discuss that
Yeah.
in feminist circles, nor in the gender studies programs or in public debates or anything. All they would latch onto is a very bad statement that women did not have the right to vote. But there was
Mm.
a reason. There was a reason, like making the draft compulsory along with the vote, which women obviously weren't even interested to be part of.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of reasons. First of all, I covered that whole idea that women controlled a lot of, like, on the local level, culture and cultural expectations, and they were aware of that. And they were aware that they imparted that. And at the time, that kind of cultural or local custom had a lot more influence over people. So they called it the power of necessity. And they said that we represent men, in the nursery, just as they represent us in the ballot box. And they talked about how, it's a balance. It's men have to trust us. We have to trust men. We don't want to break that because that may end up having some very negative effects on families and culture. So
Right.
they had a very reasoned approach to it. Um, and part of it was the respect of men's role as as leading in the external sphere, and their role as leading in the local sphere that establishes custom and habit,
Right.
or in the private sphere. And also at the time, like prior to the vote going from public to private, women engaged in a custom, and again, that's that influence over custom, that influence over people socially. They engaged in a custom in which called looking on. So men would be submitting or casting their ballots publicly. So
Mm.
they would have to go in public in front of all of the town's women and show who they were voting for. who
Yes.
they felt was the person or the man to lead them, right? And I mean, because to give a sort of an idea of how that would look today, now imagine if every man who voted for Trump had to do so in front of an audience of all the women in his town or village or city. Like, can you imagine that? Like, that's a lot of power. And that's before the vote became private. That was something that women did, that they took part in, and also men who weren't part of the vote. So they watched this process. They
Yes.
made sure that this process, like they were part of it and that they had a say in it. And people ignore that completely.
Yes.
And when they say that women are disenfranchised, well, in that case, I mean, it almost feels like um, if men have to vote publicly and they are subject to public shame for whoever that they are supporting, it seems more like once again, women are controlling the process, you know, and like if you go back in history, you'll see this over and over again. You'll see evidence of women controlling the situation through this kind of control of custom and expectations and social habits
Right.
and social pressure, you know, and feminism completely ignores that throughout history in
Right.
order to establish this idea that women were oppressed. And of course, it's easy to ignore because there isn't really a record of it in the same way there's a record of battles and votes and kings and stuff like that. Although interestingly enough, there is now a record of it on social media.
Right.
And we're seeing what probably occurred throughout all of human history, which is the pressure that women placed on men and
Right.
each other socially. But now we have a recording of it.
Right.
Now we have, you know, archives of this kind of bullying and social pressure that women engage in. But this
Right.
isn't something new.
Right.
They would have done it in the past too.
Right. Right.
Okay. That
No.
was a long aside there.
No, no, this is perfect. I'm telling you, the topics are, are on fire. Whichever the points that you're bringing forward are really good. So, I think it was on one of the streams dated 2016, around that. It was on one of the streams which says the road to red pill. Okay, there was a comment under that video. I'll just read a single line
Mm,
of it so that you'll get the idea. The comment was by an account named Male Positive. They just mentioned that I have been part of the men's movement since 1988. Believe me, there was just as much resistance, if not more, to men's issues in the late 1980s and early 1900s than there is now. Even
mm,
when Warren Farrell first tried to get on the TV to discuss men's and boys' issues, he was only given the chance to speak if at least three or four feminists were asked to be on the panel at the same time to balance the view.
mm,
So,
mm,
uh, the point that I'm trying to get at is the evolution of the threat narratives by the feminists in the pop culture or through the CIA or something like that, and also bringing forward the falsification of the data where it shows only women as the victims all the time, and also the simultaneous
mhm,
growth of online spaces where men's issues also started gaining some attention. How do you explain the
mm.
online spaces in the early 90s when these discussions just started, given that we have just witnessed the birth of the internet at the time?
Well, I wasn't really in the spaces during the early 90s. Like,
Okay.
I, probably the earliest I would have been in would be the early 2000s. So I can't really, I'm not quite that old. I can't give you a understanding of what the early discourse was. But I do know that this is something that's, you know, Belford Bax talked about these issues back like almost, I think, 150 years ago. So I
The
mean, it's
legal
this is an
subjection
ongoing.
of men, if I'm right, and the fraud of
Yeah.
feminism.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So this has been an ongoing battle.
Hmm.
And I think that part of it is because it really challenges people's sense of identity. I think women take an identity now from being a victim, or they feel like being a victim is how they effect control in their life.
Hmm.
And then men take an identity from being the alpha and omega of saving women, I suppose. And when you challenge all of that, it's just difficult. People don't want, Like challenging someone's identity is one of the most difficult things. It's why a lot of fiction really follows that process. Like it'll start with a character who has some aspect of their identity challenged by some external circumstance, and then they follows the process of they redeveloping themselves. And that's really fascinating to people because it is so painful and so difficult and so rare for people to really challenge something so deep about themselves. So this discussion is, I think a lot of people start out on this side and they think, well, if people would just know, like if they could just know the issues, then if we could just raise awareness. But
Mhm.
it's deeper than that because people have invested their identities in ignoring these issues and in
Mhm.
framing them in a way that makes men's issues invisible
Right.
and overemphasizes women's issues
Mhm.
because men want some people to save and women want to be saved. It's as simple as that.
Right.
And and the only way to get through to change that is to somehow get people capable of looking at themselves from outside themselves almost. And that's very difficult. There's some
Right.
people who can just do that because I don't know, they're just have the unique psychological toughness,
Mhm.
but most people can't. Like the most precious thing to people is their identity. It's
Right.
who they think they are.
Right.
And if you challenge that, good luck. Um, and only significant pain will really get to it.
Right.
Will really compel people to do it. Because this is another thing I've said to people. So to other like, um, actually, I have a. All right, so this is the life cycle of adopting new technology.
Okay.
It's sort of reverted, but right
Good.
here you have the early adopters
Yeah.
and the early innovators, the first adopters, and then you have the chasm, and
Yeah.
then you have the early majority. And this is the life cycle of a technology.
Okay.
So the first people who will adopt it are the people who are just really into new technology. You know what I mean? Like the people who will buy like a cell phone even though it's like 3 pounds,
Right.
and you have to have a briefcase to carry it just
Mhm.
because it's so cool and what they can do. And then they'll go through and they'll think of use cases for it.
Right.
And the use cases will be sort of adopted by the first adopters,
Mhm.
who will apply them, who will do the work to apply them to business solutions or whatever else. But then there's the chasm, and the chasm is created because the early adopters, the chasm is basically the a technology starts, it moves like wildfire through the innovators and the first adopters, but then it stops and the movement doesn't go any further, right?
Mhm.
The chasm, it's because of the chasm, and the chasm is early adopters are somewhat more conservative and they want social proof for the technology. So they want to see other people in their social groups using it before they use it. But if
Right.
nobody's using it, then they're not going to use it. So this is the chasm. And the only thing that gets a technology from here to here is pain. That technology has to resolve a significant pain among the early adopters. In other words, they start using it and hours and hours of work, they no longer have to do it. For
Mhm.
example, one of the technologies was I guess a type of automated like spreadsheet thing.
Okay.
And one of the early adopters was a medical group that was trying to get through the Fed's bureaucracy to get their medicines approved. And
Mhm.
each day that the medicines weren't approved, they were losing like a $20 million. So
Right.
every day that was shaved off the time to get through all of the bureaucratic paperwork was
Mhm.
$20 million saved. That's a lot of pain. $20 million of pain a day. So they had a high incentive to adopt the technology, even though it was completely new. They had to rearrange everything to, they had to retrain people to use it, to input the stuff. They had to completely change how they did business, but they did it because the pain was so great.
Right.
This is true about men's issues too. You have the innovators, you have the early adopters, you also have the people who were shot over the chasm because of pain. These are the guys who
Right.
lost their children, lost everything in a divorce, experienced domestic violence by a woman and were arrested for it, that kind of thing. They were shot over the chasm because of the pain. But everybody else is here. And until the pain is sufficient, they're not going to get here.
Right, right, right,
So that's the problem with the general adoption of men's issues.
right. And I think
As it,
please go ahead. Please go ahead. Yeah.
sorry, no, um, and and this is what I've said. It's like a lot of men got on this side of the chasm
Mm,
because of that pain that they experienced.
right,
You can't really expect the rest of the world to get on your side of the chasm without the same level of pain.
right.
And yeah, I know it sounds, I guess maybe it's depressing.
No, it is.
Um, but
Yeah.
it's what I'm seeing is
Mhm.
essentially we're going to have to go through something very excruciating before people start realizing that their identities aren't serving them and they need to adjust them. They need to blame women. Let's all blame women. Let's do it. Let's see what happens. Okay, go ahead.
I think
I'll be quiet now.
I saw a beautiful message on the board as well saying Amber Heard is nuts. That's the most beautiful line, I guess.
Yes. And then the rest of my chicken scrawl, which is
Yeah.
probably incomprehensible. Let me see. Oh no, I said it twice. Amber Heard is nuts. I just kept repeating that. Oops, my thing is sort of deteriorating. It's not meant to be moved around.
Right.
Okay, put it back there.
That's good. That's
All
good.
right.
Yeah. So I think towards the end of June 2024, just a month ago, there was a pink feather campaign that you may have come across on X, Twitter Spaces. So
Mm-hmm.
there was this account that goes by Human Rights Justice, where I'm sure that you remember the long thread of the conversation that we had. Even I was part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So the account said something like, in the lines that you can't blame all women. Women are feminists, and then you responded with this: women are feminists until proven capable of taking responsibility. And then the
Mm,
conversation on from there. So I think basically what the person was trying to do was resorting to not all women are like that. The standard
mm.
uh, argument that feminists put forward just to get the
Yes.
idea that not all women are really that bad. It's just a small group that does that. But this small group is the very group that influences the major changes in the society that we see today. And these
Yeah.
women
Yeah.
don't hold this small community accountable for their decisions. They do not do
Mm-hmm.
that. Whereas, on the other hand, if we take men, and when someone points out that it's the men who are the rapists, it's the men who caused all the wars or something like that, then you see a band of men coming together and bringing forward laws that puts other men in check and their bad
Mm-hmm.
behavior under observation. They'll even regulate it to the extent that they won't feel sad that they would even have to kill them at the end of the day as a form of punishment.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't see that
Yep.
happening from the women's side. Why do you think that is? Why do you think women are not willing to hold other women's bad behavior as they should have been? Is what my question is. Why do you think that?
Um, yeah, well, there's a couple of things I think are happening there. The person who said, well, not all women. Well, yeah, all women, not all women, because there are some women who do hold other women accountable and hold themselves accountable.
Mhm.
But the thing is that it is all women unless they hold themselves accountable, like by definition,
Mhm.
and yes, I mean, we're in a situation where we blame men for actions taken by a criminal class. So actions taken by a class that's not just deemed socially unacceptable by most men, but will be put in a position where most men will feel like physical violence against them is acceptable if they're like a violent type of guy. So it's like, yes, men hold each other accountable all the time. And the problem with saying not all women is, but it is all women if they don't hold themselves accountable and they don't hold other women accountable. The end. And you can't compare that to male rapists because men hold them accountable. They spend a lot of time trying to track them down, prevent them, as long as they're being told that it's happening. And in fact, for example, in the UK, rape is the crime that is most likely to end in a conviction. Like it's almost, I think, double now that of any other crime. So yes, the system of law holds men accountable for that, and it has throughout all of human history, as far as we know. And it has nothing to do with women being treated like property fines for criminal activity have nothing to do with women being treated by property, but that's another story. So it is an issue. It is all women, unless they hold themselves to account and they hold other women to account. And that's the only way that it's not all women, right? And then, yes, there's a lot of women who don't hold feminists to account, and or the women who refuse to recognize responsibility. And there's all these, I guess, feminist women who basically spend all their time saying not all feminists are like that, whereas so much of their time trying to shout down the people who are pointing out feminist misbehavior, and almost no time actually correcting or holding feminists to account for that misbehavior. So it's like they'll say not all feminists are like that, but at the same time, they're doing exactly the thing that they're saying that not all feminists do, which is holding themselves to account. So if you say, yeah, feminists don't hold themselves to account, and a feminist says, well, not all feminists, and you're like, well, you're just an example of that. You're not holding feminists to account. And it's unfortunate, but like there is a significant amount of holding to account, and I think men sort of instinctively move towards holding each other to account, because if you think about it, that gives their actions and moral choices meaning. You know, it makes a virtuous man virtuous. That is the source of his virtue, is the fact that he is held to account and he holds himself to account.
Right.
What are women if there's nothing? They can't be virtuous by definition. If you cannot be bad, you cannot be virtuous.
Right.
So yeah, that's my thing with that.
Well,
And yeah, like if women don't want to be associated with feminism, then they need to start denying it and shouting it down.
right. Got it. So, in your first interview with Paul Elam, probably that's your first interview, I guess, where you mentioned that feminism's Achilles heel is in how it hides the female perpetrators, and that their advocacy is aimed at neutralizing a non-existent threat. So, when
Mm.
general public such as us are able to, with a bit of common sense and good observation skills, can actually make this statement, why do you think many men still exhibit desperate hunger for feminine approval in general?
Because I think that, well, you have to look at, this is sort of a really deep thing. They base their identity on female approval. And in a way, it's almost impossible not to, because the way that human mind is structured, you need an other to have a sense of self. And the sense of self is developed through understanding your effect on the other. So you have yourself, you want to understand yourself, and you understand yourself as a reflection, like in your actions in terms of their effect on the other. So it's almost impossible for men to get away from that unless they become, I guess, narcissistic and completely self-involved. But that would also, I think, end up reducing their theory of mind and their cognitive ability and even their sense of achievement. So it's almost like it's impossible to get away from that psychologically for human beings. The problem is that women don't also do that. Then they're not encouraged to also do that, to start seeing their actions in terms of their effect on men, which develops a sense of self and self-efficacy and encourages achievement. Because when you do that, when you see that your actions are important and they matter, you can start looking at, for example, if you don't have the ability to draw, you can say, but I can acquire that ability through hard work. If you don't have the ability to sing, I can acquire that ability through hard work. So you start to focus more on your world being a result of your actions rather than just other people's actions on you. And women are stuck in that mentality where they aren't able to be open to seeing how their actions affect men. And I think it's an aspect of lack of development, perhaps, because I think in past eras, women had to understand this, because if they didn't, people didn't survive, because they were that critical to the continuance of the species, not just as giving birth, but also doing a lot of the labor necessary to keep people alive. So they had an understanding that, if I don't pickle the whatever at this time, if I don't take care of the harvest, if I don't properly prepare it for winter, then we are going to starve and all die. So they had an understanding that if they didn't take action, bad things happened. So that developed that sense. And I think it was much more powerful in women in the past. And in fact, if you look at stats, it past generations of people perceived women as having more agency than they do now.
Right.
Yeah, we as a one of the effects on knock on effects of feminism has been to reduce the perception of people's perception of women's agency. So now people see women far more as victims of things than they do as agents of change or responsible.
Right.
And women today have just invested in that identity, and they think that that's the way they get attention, that's the way they get things done. And it's really unfortunate because it means that they're constantly reliant on controlling men, controlling their actions, or they feel like they have no voice and no ability in the greater world. And that's, I mean, and also that reduces their ability to achieve. It reduces a huge portion of their sense of self, in my opinion. So, I mean, that's my analysis. I don't know if it's a little bit, I think, maybe confusing. I don't know.
No,
Um,
it's fine. Yeah. All right.
yeah.
No, I'm able to follow what you're trying to say because without that, I wouldn't have been able to be silent and to process whatever you're trying to say. Don't worry, it's good. So I think in another interaction with the WIG standard, I guess you mentioned that men require their own space with no feminist oversight to speak about these issues, such as being sexually abused by adult women. So
Mm-hmm.
how do we explain feminists' allergic reactions to reality and peer-reviewed statistics, and especially, evolutionary side of the things? Because please bear with me. This one more line I would like to add that on one hand we can make use of the statistics put forward by Nicola Graham Cavan or Deborah Powney or Liz Bates, Paul Nathanson. We can bring forward all these statistics, but still we don't see them welcoming
Mm,
this side of the conversation, although they continue to say
mm.
we have to open the conversations, we have to include everyone into the spaces, we have to make sure that every other
That's what
person.
got me kicked out.
Yeah. Yes.
They literally said, "Why can't we have the conversation?" So I brought the conversation to them, to the feminists on the panel, and they kicked me out for it. That's because they just want to feel like they are good people. They don't want to actually do the actions of good people. They just want to feel like they're good people. They want to perform good people things. They don't want to be held to a standard of being a good person, but they want to perform them and feel. And ultimately, feminism isn't about reality and it isn't about solving problems. It's just about manipulating rich men into giving feminists power and clout. And on a more individual level, it's about having that kind of moral authority over the men in your life. So you
Right.
feel like you're right and they're wrong.
Mhm.
And ultimately, there's no real point to asking, well, why don't they? Well, the reason why they don't is because it's not useful to them.
um Men's issues are not being given enough exposure in the media and stuff, or probably not equal importance in acknowledging the male victimhood. I think I've narrowed down to a list of a few reasons that could be gamma bias, women's in-group bias, and then moral chivalry of the people, women's sexual receptivity and men's sexual receptivity, agent-object dichotomy, and also neoteny. So how do
Mm.
you bring this to the public? How do we make them understand that men's issues also matter, and how do we make it happen? What do you suggest to that?
Well, going back to my chart that I showed you,
Mm.
essentially we have to work with people who we have,
Okay.
the people who have already understand these issues and are already willing to allow these issues to influence their identities. And we need to start building a community and building almost like, I don't want to say a separate economy, but something like that, like a building people helping each other. Like Justin Trottier has built shelters based on private contributions from men, mostly men, who are helping each other. So you got to build this kind of community and the spirit of assistance to each other. And that would be the first adopters, developing ways and means to help and assist each other, talk to each other, figure out how to manage the emotional pressures of recognizing these issues, and figuring out where they apply and make interesting stuff. Like for example, a lot of this stuff I think makes interesting writing. Like not necessarily like writing that is just talking about these issues in a very literal way,
Right.
but thinking about this stuff on a deeper level informs interesting writing. And I'm trying to prove that with the captive eye, that this stuff can create great art. And but that's the kind of thing. You apply these ideas to the process of living. You
Right.
find ways that they solve stuff. And
Mhm.
then you sort of have to wait
Mhm.
until the pain of ignoring these issues gets to the point where the early majority starts to look for something new. And it might actually just start with fiction, because fiction is getting so boring.
Right.
That's a pain. Boredom is one of the most motivating pains in all of human history. Like people get bored and they start wars, just to have something to do. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but boredom is a huge problem with humans. We're very easily bored, and the fact that this narrative is destroying entertainment is a pain. And then you get in there and you say, well, here's something new, here's something innovative, and not only is it new and innovative, it explains how you can live as a
Right.
person understanding these issues. It gives you a roadmap of
Right.
of who you are with a recognition of these issues. If that makes sense. So
Right.
that's how I see it. Maybe might be in a completely different direction than you were expecting, but that's what I think
Oh, that's
is a way forward, is through
right.
stories
Right. Right.
and storytelling. Because people tend to need
Mhm.
stories become roadmaps to who we can become.
Right. Right. True. Fair enough. I think I'll go with the last question so that we'll wrap it up as quick as.
Sure.
Yeah. So another major problem that I personally have with feminism is its double standards. This is where I think its major
Mm,
hypocrisy lies. Now, if we go back to probably around 1968, the Freedom Trash Can movement and Miss America protest and all that, we saw women
mhm,
burning bras to break the stereotypes about women in general, the eyelashes, the long hair, makeup, and stuff. On one hand, feminism remains angry about this enforced femininity, but on the other hand, it supports the trans movement, where men typically present themselves with those same stereotypes that feminists fought against. So,
mm.
how do we address that? Like, how do we, bring a balanced conversation around this?